Governor Nome was just standing there not knowing what to do because it was just completely bizarre. And there are reports that his own senior advisors are, incredulous and unable to understand why he's doing what he's doing. And he says things that are just completely unfathomable as well.
I'm wondering, listening to those two clips, obviously, it's ratcheting up. We've only got a couple of weeks left. How do you feel, Amy, when you hear Trump saying things like that about Kamala Harris? Does that make you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, I've never liked how the president talks about many people, as a matter of fact. And it's been one of the issues that I have with him as a candidate and as a president. So I'm not going to defend. I do think, of course we're going to hear hot rhetoric. But I just think that there's, rhetoric like that isn't necessary. So.
Lindi, do you think there's a danger that it just lowers the tone, dare I say it, of the campaigning? Is it something that voters respond to? I mean, I'm guessing Trump's base probably quite like it. I'm just wondering wider across voters whether this is something that they like to see their candidates doing, really, just swearing about each other.
Thank you so much for having me today. I also want to give Amy credit for refusing to defend his remarks because it is indefensible, and I appreciate that from a Republican. He not only attacked her, though, he also went on stage and waxed lyrical about the late Arnold Palmer's genitals. Am I allowed to say that on air?
Yeah.
I try to be as euphemistic as possible, but this is something that he actually did. Okay, we are 15 days from the election, and he's talking about another dude's junk. I feel bad even just saying it, but that's what he did, and we shouldn't sugarcoat the words of the Republican candidate for president.
Amy, I want to ask you a little bit about the health questions which are bubbling around about Trump. I was reading that there's been analysis published in the New York Times of Trump's speeches up to earlier this month, and they found that he's doing far less than he was in 2016. 283 throughout all of 2016. He's only held 61 rallies so far in 2024. There are reports he's scaling back his campaigning because he's feeling tired, he's feeling fatigued. What do you make of those reports?
I think that's possible. He's an older man than he was, obviously. He's nearing 80 years old. So it's possible. I also think that the assassination attempts have had their effect on that. And well, a couple things. So I think that there's some real fear around that, as there should be. And I think that they've encouraged him to do a few less and to change how they do them. And then thirdly, frankly, he's continuing to do well in the polls and gather strength the quieter he is, because when he gets out there, he says dumb things. So if I'm on the campaign, I'm telling him, just sit tight, because frankly, the Harris-Walz campaign is faltering, and let them continue to stumble.
I just wonder, Amy, though, how much of a problem it is when for so long Trump was going on about Joe Biden being old when he was still running. He's old, he's not up to it. That's difficult now for Trump. If this is what he's doing, and he is an old man, and if he's feeling a bit tired, and on the other hand, you've got Kamala Harris going, look at me, here are my medical records, I'm young and healthy, let's go.
Yeah.
Right, no, his brain is disintegrating.
It was always a little ludicrous to have a 80-year-old man being criticized by a 78-year-old man, right? I think both candidates for their age were troubling. Again, however, it's interesting to me that age is now somehow not an issue. And we are talking more about Harris and the stumbles of her campaign and sort of the finger pointing. And frankly, that's what's in the news more and more. Yes, Trump saying things, but that seems sort of baked into this cake. And so voters are really sort of getting an eyeful of Vice President Harris. And that's, I think, ultimately what this is going to come down to.
Go on, Lindi.
Thank you so much. I just want to say his brain is disintegrating on the national stage. This is someone who confused Biden with Obama 7 times, who confused Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley, someone who said that the Americans dominated the airports during the American Revolution. Need I remind you that the American Revolution happened in 1770s? So this is someone who clearly isn't fully there, and his prefrontal cortex, which governs inhibition, is obviously atrophying as well. He's unable to contain himself. We saw him swaying bizarrely to the music for 40 minutes on stage, inexplicably. And Kristen Noem, or the Governor Noem, I'm sorry, Governor Noem was just standing there not knowing what to do because it was just completely bizarre. And there are reports that his own senior advisors are incredulous and unable to understand why he's doing what he's doing. And he says things that are just completely unfathomable as well. He praises Hannibal Lecter. He talks about batteries and sharks. He talks about everything under the sun except the issues that matter the most to the American people. And when he does happen to mention a policy or two, he's out there advocating for tariffs on all consumer goods, which will jack up prices for all Americans and cause widespread suffering, not to mention a collapse of the American economy. So everything he says is just completely bonkers, for lack of a better word.
And yet, Lindi,
And yet somehow he's winning.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say, Amy.
Let me tell you, he may be old, he may be in cognitive decline, but he's a master at lying.
Hang on, Amy, hang on. Lindi, go ahead, and then Amy come in. Go on, Lindi.
Well, as I said, he's a master manipulator. He knows how to gaslight like nobody else. He's been lying to the American people for decades. This is just what he does. And he's trying to memory hold the final year of his presidency, which is an absolute calamity, let's be honest. We couldn't find toilet paper. The stock market's crashing. 20% of the country was on unemployment, was out of a job. So this is just obscene. We need to remind people how awful it was, how terrible it was to wake up each day to just like brace ourselves for the next terrible tweet from our president. And I just want to say one thing in terms of, Amy brought up a good point. One of the worst things to happen was to block him from Twitter, because a lot of Americans have forgotten just how disastrous and how just crazy this guy is. This guy is just crazy. He is not the person who's going to wake up at 3 a.m. and take that proverbial 3 a.m. emergency call. He's absolutely incapable of handling matters of national security.
Okay, Amy, come in.
Yeah, I'm just going to say this. He's been on Twitter for, I don't know even how many months now, 5 months, 4 months, 5 months. And I appreciate Lindy's talking points, and there are some that I agree with. But the facts are that she's being willfully ignoring the struggles that her candidate is having. Frankly, the immigration issue is going to be a massive problem for Vice President Harris. The work that the Biden administration and the Harris administration did on immigration is catching up to them. The missteps of Tim Walz as the vice presidential candidate, as my governor, he has stumbled on the national stage. Some of the interview choices, and we talked about this last week here. We talked about the Vogue interview. We talked about some of the podcasts she's chosen, some of her performances. I mean, like, I'm not here to defend Trump, but to pretend like everyone in America is just morons for supporting him, and that and sort of berating them into voting for Harris is not working. So I think,
Amy, can I respectfully respond?
They just don't want to.
Go on, Lindi.
Thank you, Amy. You bring up a very interesting point, but I do want to say she understands it's the economy. Stupid, as we always say. It's really coming down to that. People have suffered tremendously over the last couple of years, and a lot of that is through no fault of the Biden-Harris administration. Inflation was a global phenomenon. Let's not forget that. And let's not forget the fact that the United States emerged out of this situation more strongly and more resiliently than any nation on earth. Inflation is now under 3%, well within the range of what the Federal Reserve wants. All right. But it's cumulative inflation that has caused immense suffering. And that's why she's laid out a number of economic proposals to address that.
With just 16 days to go until the US election, and last night, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris were at rallies in swing states last night to drum up support. The vice president and Democratic nominee Harris had the singer Lizzo join her on stage in Michigan.
They say if Kamala wins, then the whole country will be like Detroit. Okay? Proud like Detroit. Resilient like Detroit. We're talking about the same Detroit that innovated the auto industry and the music industry. So put some respect on Detroit's name.
Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump took a slightly different tone and aimed it directly at his rival.
So you have to tell Kamala Harris that you've had enough, that you just can't take it anymore. We can't stand you. You're a vice president. The worst. You're the worst vice president. Kamala, you're fired. Get the hell out of here. You're fired. Get out of here.
Now, Mary Anna Mancuso is a political commentator and former Republican strategist and joins us now. Mary, good afternoon. Thanks for giving us your time.
Good afternoon, Alexis. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Quite a difference in styles, perhaps, but a lot of criticism has been thrown at Kamala Harris for not doing enough interviews. She did do Fox News this week. Has she been doing enough, do you think, to win those leftover undecided votes?
Yeah, look, right now, the name of the game, it's interesting. If you watch Kamala Harris and you watch Donald Trump, they're doing things that you're not usually doing in the final weeks of a campaign. They're crossing over to go to the other side to try to peel away votes. We had Donald Trump at a Univision town hall this week. Kamala Harris, as you mentioned, on Fox News. It's really interesting, and you can tell that this race is going to be extremely, extremely close.
A lot of people have been commenting on certain things that Donald Trump has been saying in some of these interviews. Now, look, some people are Trump fans, some people are not Trump fans, but is there a genuine question, just like there was when the suitability of Joe Biden was being discussed, of whether or not he was suitable health-wise and mentally to take on the nomination? Can the same question be asked of Donald Trump? A lot of some of the things that he says are inaccurate, plain wrong. Sometimes he looks confused or lost. Is there enough scrutiny going into actually whether Donald Trump himself is fit for office?
I think that's a very fair question. I don't think there is. I think there are beginning to be some rumblings and questions regarding his mental acuity and his cognitive abilities, especially in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Yesterday at the rally, he began talking about Arnold Palmer, the golfer. He was talking about him in the shower. I mean, the man just went right off the rails on that. And so it begins to be a question. And when we saw the interview with Kamala Harris on Fox News, Bret Baier asked her about Joe Biden's mental acuity and his cognitive decline. And the truth of the matter is that he's not the one running for president right now. And the questions need to be directed to her as her candidacy to run for president. But the press is not asking the same questions of Donald Trump, who is now the oldest candidate in the race, by the way.
But do you think that it was ever thus, in a way, with Donald Trump? Even in 2016, Donald Trump didn't follow auto cue script. He would have his anecdotes and his stories, and many will say that's actually what his fans like about him. They think of him as one of them. He's not a politician. He's one of them. Is that still the attraction for Trump fans?
I'm sure that is definitely still the attraction for Trump fans. I think that what's important, though, is there's a stark difference between Donald Trump in 2016 as the presidential candidate, in 2020, and now 4 years later in 2024. You can tell just based on watching him, he's tired on the campaign trail. Staff is telling the press that he's exhausted. He's canceled some events. I mean, look, he's 78 years old. He's running for the highest office in the land. The question has to be asked if he's able to complete the office and do the duties of the job of the presidency should he win in November. And people are not asking that question. And I think that when we have the option here in America and we're looking at these two candidates, the question becomes, do you want to move the country forward, or do you want to go back to 4 more years, possibly worse, of Donald Trump as the former president? We all remember what it looked like under Donald Trump.
Let's talk about what Donald Trump's campaign has been doing, because just as you thought it couldn't get any more bizarre, the tech billionaire Elon Musk has said that he's going to give away $1 million per day to a registered voter in Pennsylvania, that swing state, of course, until the day of the election. Now, to be in with a chance of winning the money, you have to sign a pro-constitution petition by his campaign group, America PAC, which he set up to support Donald Trump. This is what it sounded like when he surprised the first winner, in inverted commas. I had no idea this was going to happen, with $1 million of his own personal fortune.
By the way, John had no idea. So anyway, you're welcome. The only thing we ask for the $1 million is that you be a spokesperson for the petition, and that's it. Really, that's it. Do you want to say anything? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Elon. This is great. I'm really ecstatic. I want to congratulate you on your rocket catch last week. Big curveball. But yeah, I've been following you for 10 years. Got your biography 10 years ago, and been watching ever since, and big fan. So
Thank you. All right. Well, cool.
I know you will have your own views on, spending scandals here, Lord Ali and the glasses, etc. But it is a world away, isn't it, to have the world's richest man handing out $1 million to people. And this comes in the same week as it was revealed that Musk is a Republican super donor because he's given nearly $75 million to Trump's campaign in the past few months alone. Why? What does he want out of it? We know that he supports Trump, but what does he want in return? Well, joining me now is Owen Higgins, author of Owned, How Tech Billionaires on the Right Bought the Loudest Voices on the Left. Hi there, Owen.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah,
Thanks
good.
for having me.
Good, thank you. Absolute pleasure to have you as well. Before we get into your book and all the things that you've written about Musk before, what's your reaction to this latest news? Because it's amazing he still has the capability to surprise, but he does. Giving away $1 million a day to voters in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think that my initial reaction is, let's see if those checks cash. Let's see if they clear. Musk promises a lot of large financial gifts to people. He promises a lot of big things. I mean, he's been promising that we can get to Mars in 10 years for about 15 years. So I think that, and we're nowhere near that, of course. So I think that with any promise that Musk makes, I think that it should be taken with several pillars of salt. However, having said that, if he is going to do this, and again, for somebody with his personal fortune, this is really not a huge amount of money. It's
his hotel bill for a year, isn't it? It's his personal flight bill, yeah.
Right. I mean, like, even if that, right? It might even be. It's inconsequential to him to give $1 million to one voter for the next 3 weeks. I mean, that's maybe $25 million total. That's absolutely nothing to him. I do think that the reason that he is doing this, though, to kind of drum up attention for Trump and to generate more enthusiasm for his particular brand of right-wing politics, is probably a little bit more interesting than the actual promise that he's making, in that Musk continues to want to drive the conversation in the U.S. political spheres toward the right in a very specific way that touches on his particular ideology, whether it's anti-regulation or the brand of social conservatism that he adheres to.
Yeah, I mean, when he talks, if you take him at his word, he does seem sincerely to believe that democracy itself is at stake. That's why he says he got involved, even though it was, of course, Trump who questioned the results of the last election. And if anyone's put democracy at stake, it's him. But, his thesis is Kamala is a puppet. More immigration means that the Republicans won't win again. So this is kind of your last chance to vote for those values. That lower taxes mean not just his business, but everyone's business can flourish, and he's an entrepreneur. He does genuinely seem to believe those things.
Kind of. I would say that he certainly believes that more immigration of what I think he would consider the wrong kind is going to damage the United States. And if you want to know what he means by the wrong kind of immigration, I think you can kind of refer to his background being from South Africa. as far as his devotion to democracy and freedom of speech, which is kind of a part of the rhetoric that he uses here, I don't really put a lot of stock in that. The way he has run Twitter or X or however you want to refer to it now has resulted in a lot of censorship to the benefit of censorious regimes like Modi's India, like Saudi Arabia. And those are arguably authoritarian regimes, depending on who you are talking to. And I think that his refusal to enforce this idea of freedom of speech in the face of these challenges can kind of raise some questions. As far as cutting taxes, lower regulations, is pretty standard right-wing, certainly right-wing American, just pandering to the base there.
And meanwhile, on the latest in the campaign, well, let's start with Donald Trump. He's being Donald Trump, isn't he? Which is what Donald Trump does. He is Donald Trump, and it's everything he says almost is either outrageous to too many people or bizarre, and quite often both of those things. There's one example of that, Sarah, at the campaign rally in Pennsylvania just on Saturday. He started talking at some length about the legendary golfer Arnold Palmer, with reference to his manhood, his anatomy. Have a listen.
Arnold Palmer was all man. And I say that in all due respect to women, and I love women. But this is a guy that was all man. And I refuse to say it, but when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there, they said, oh my God, that's unbelievable. I had to say it.
And he did say it, Sarah, didn't he? And the thing is, he went on for 10 minutes in that vein.
I know. I mean, you can't shut up Donald Trump, but in a horrible sort of way, or a funny sort of way. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's a comedian. He's an entertainer. He was entertaining the crowds, and he had a lot of viral play with that. He also went to McDonald's and served some French fries to go and troll Kamala Harris, who he claims, without any evidence, that she never worked at McDonald's. So Donald Trump is doing what he does best, entertaining the crowd. And honestly, it works for him. He looked very low energy at various points in the campaign, but he's coming out of the gate strong in these closing moments, days, weeks. I mean, every vote counts now. As I say, I'm voting already. So the fact is, he's dominating the airwaves, and Kamala Harris has chosen to focus her closing message on whether or not people want Donald Trump back in power. I'm not sure that is the right message, because it means he's using up all the oxygen rather than, forget about that entertainer over here. Here's what I'm going to do for you, the American student. I think that worked rather well for Joe Biden when he was campaigning from his basement and barely seen at all in 2020. So let's see how things play out.
Let's have a listen back just to some of that Kamala Harris attack on Donald Trump.
There are some people suggesting that one of the signs of mental degeneration, which people of the age, he is 78, can be prone to, is losing your inhibitions in terms of what you say. So I think perhaps there is a serious component in that. It's been very clear, frankly, that Donald Trump has been behaving increasingly oddly. There was that rally where he stopped taking questions and danced for 40 minutes. There was appearing on the sofa of Fox and Friends, apparently sitting on a towel. There have been some very extreme statements about calling in the police, the military on his opponent. And it's quite clear that he is now dialing down his sort of on-the-record public appearances and just going to these rallies and saying what it is. Now, does this matter? As every pollster will tell you, the election looks to be neck and neck. As we were hearing from Kate, there's some polls today suggesting that Kamala Harris is catching up a bit. I mean, the latest, for what it's worth, Washington Post swing states poll has her ahead in Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, draw in Nevada, and Trump ahead in Arizona, and North Carolina. Now, that would probably be enough for her to win very, very narrowly. But I mean, the point is that I think at some point the voters will take a decision which might swing it one way or the other. And I have to say, I can't see where Donald Trump, particularly where he is behaving, is going to get any extra votes that would take him over the top. Whereas one can logically see a reason why, as Kamala Harris gets more known, women particularly might swing towards her. So, I do think that it's, that there's kind of, Trump has reached a point where for most people, it's not funny anymore. It is, to use that phrase used by Tim Waltz, it is all a bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, the occasions do seem to be coming, I don't know, thicker and faster. When Donald Trump is saying things in interviews that he does with this or that podcast or on the rally stage, which people supporting Donald Trump then have to explain away, or somehow smooth over by saying something completely different. Or Donald, he says this thing. What he means is X. And then what he means, and X turns out to bear no resemblance to what he actually just said.
Or do they? Right? Because there's always been an element with Donald Trump of just brushing off this stuff. I mean, I agree with Adam. I think some of it is getting increasingly weirder. But it does follow a pattern and a trend that he has employed for years now, which is saying things which are increasingly odd, are very strange, that he, this man is a media performer. He has changed the way that the American election is run because he's basically made it into a TV program. He's made himself the main bad guy, the main slightly, odd politician who's not supposed to be a politician. And I think actually in playing to that, it's kind of what people recognise of him, whether or not they fully engage with every single word he says. I do, though, agree with Adam that it's getting wilder. And the problem is that Trump, the first time round, he had all these wild elements to his personality, but he also had a core of policy that made sense to people, or at least stuff that people felt, yeah, I feel that injustice and I want someone to do something about it. I think we're hearing much less of that from him this time around. That may well be because his team have judged that there's no point in fighting on policy because people are not going to make their decisions that way. But I wonder, with it so close, whether or not in the end, if people are thinking logically about how they're going to cast their ballot, if that's enough to tip people just away from voting at all. And if the Democrats can get out the vote, if it comes down to the get out the vote operation and the Democrats are more successful and they have a better handle on where their base is, then they may well do it just on that alone.
Well, let's just imagine that you're right, and let's just imagine that Donald Trump does have a plan here, that it is conscious, it is in his terms a strategy, even that he can say things which seem way over the top, and he can rely on others to try and take the edge off it later on, which is what they do.
He can say anything because he's shameless, and
does.
Most
the thing is,
politicians
does it work to do that?
You can get away with it.
If there's almost no one left who isn't decided, there are no doubt a few, but if there's no one left pretty much who isn't decided, it's about who's most motivated to come out and vote. And that's clearly the focus of the Democratic side. They want to get people who would vote Democrat ordinarily to come out and vote, and they're not sure that they're necessarily going to do that. And so who's got the most committed and motivated voters?
Or who has the most effective mechanism of getting out the vote? The Democrats arguably understand their base well. There are some voters who will turn to Trump this time round who would not previously have voted Trump, and maybe it's more complicated for the Republicans to get those people to turn out and vote. It's more complicated to quantify them. The questions are they in the right places? And, if you are pursuing this strategy, I mean, Adam's right. He will say whatever he wants, and he has done before. I mean, this is a guy who has gone through lots of trials since the last time he was president, and he is still in this position. I think that ship has sailed. I think the question is more about what is motivating people to vote. And at the moment, Trump is in a decent position. Whether or not Kamala Harris is going to pull it back and whether or not she can turn it round, they are neck and neck in this race. It is incredibly close. This is not a guy who's trailing by 20 points, despite the strategy.
No.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly true. But at the same time, some of the things that he was relying on, for example, the economy has eased quite a lot and has got a lot better. The other thing we'll have to look at is his voting coalition. Now, one of the things he's done very successfully is align himself with the Christian right.
Yeah.
Well, the Christian right doesn't like talking about Arnold Palmer's penis.
And also, he didn't strike the right balance on abortion for them. I mean, there were people in his team who felt deeply frustrated that he hadn't gone as hard on abortion as they had wanted him to.
And likewise, women, one of the factors in this is that Harris is doing very, very well amongst women, including white women. Much better than Trump is doing, although he's had some success in bringing some minority men onto his side. So, again, you come back to, the arithmetics of who's likely to vote and where it's going to go. And, it is neck and neck. But, I just feel that all the media commentary is, Harris struggling to catch up, Donald Trump edges ahead. I mean, the truth is that, she has as good a chance as him of doing this.
Although it's in the nature of our business to sort of call it one way or the other at any given moment, it is not actually callable. I want to come back to this before we finish. We have people like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who of course is a Republican and a supporter of Donald Trump, saying no, he doesn't mean that. He means the military being used to keep peace on the streets if we get some sort of a further outbreak of disorder. I mean, how seriously should we take Donald Trump saying these things? He is running to be president. He may well be the president, and he would be surrounded by a much more partisan group of advisors and appointments than he was the first time round when he was a president after 2016. So is this an issue? It is an issue.
No, it's a big issue. And he didn't say what Johnson says he said. It was quite clear what he said. And indeed, some of the people closest to him have even talked about executing military generals who don't do what he says. So, this is being identified not by me, but by some Republicans against Trump as proto-fascism, that he basically does not accept the rules of democratic society. We know that he's said every single legal case that's been brought against him is unfair. The jury is crooked. The judge is crooked. He doesn't accept the verdict. He's already said that he plans on ripping apart the Department of Justice if he becomes president. And, the logic of it is that he would use the forces of which he'd be commander-in-chief to impose his will. And let's not get into his remarks about there only needing to be one more election. I mean, that's pretty clear. Now, Kamala Harris, when she was interviewed on Fox News, responded to this by denouncing what he's been saying about the enemy within and saying that she would never criticize any fellow Americans, that it's an un-American thing to do, and it's not showing respect for democracy. But I think it does show potentially how big the stakes are in this, and a lot of serious people across the political spectrum are saying those stakes are real. Against that, there are those who say, oh, it's just Trump blowing off. He says all these things, and actually when he gets in there, he'll be a conventional democratic president who will cut taxes for the rich, and I'm rich, so what do I care? That's the problem.
And it has come to the point where the Democratic side, Kamala Harris, have changed their tactics. I mean, spent a good deal of time since Tim Walz arrived as the Democrat running mate, mocking them, laughing at them, talking about the Republicans as weird. It's gone back to darker warnings.
We're going to put it right here. Lower it slowly into the oil, don't want to burn. Good. And then we're just going to hit our fry timer right here. Right there. Yep. Now we're waiting for that duty timer. So now when that duty timer comes up, again, hit the timer, take it out the oil slowly, give it a little shake so that we don't get stuck together, and then lower it back into the oil. And then, you want to do the salt over here? Yeah. I did these ones already, they're good. You just got to do that one right there. So grab that. Can we give them extra salt? No. That's good. Right there. And then we're going to grab the fry scoop right here, put it into there, and just give them a swirl. Step out. Okay, where's this little thing? Medium fry part right here, sides, and the bottom.
Keep it tight. We got the salt on it. Never touches the human hand.
Very good.
Nice and full.
Thank you.
Good. Want to do another one? Yeah. I'll grab it. Got it. Harry, look at this guy. I'm not going to mess with him, huh?
How you doing,
You
sir?
look fantastic. Hello.
This is my new baby boy.
How are you? Your new baby. How are you?
Doing great.
Kids, how are you? So this is compliments of me, okay?
All right.
You go have a good time. Don't eat too much.
Does this work for you, Sarah? He has been criticised of just, too many stunts, not enough serious words. Do they wash well with you?
Well, I think it's working, and I think it's working for him. And I honestly, like, as an American, there's nothing more American almost than serving up fries at McDonald's. It's a staple of American life, and I think when you're running a campaign, these are the kind of things you do. And he wanted to point out the inauthenticity of Kamala Harris. And so that's what he's doing. He's working at McDonald's. He's saying she's lied about her past. You know, what else has she lied about? She's not competent. And he's connecting with the people. And there was like a huge long street filled with people cheering for him with flags and MAGA hats. And this just has brought all the media attention to him. He's again dictating the narrative, and people love it.
I wonder if Kamala Harris is short of a few gimmicks. We had the sort of brat girl summer thing, didn't we? The convention was very glitzy. It felt incredibly positive. Maybe she is missing a little bit of that. As I said earlier, in terms of McDonald's, they've said in a letter signed by their entire senior US leadership team, including the President Joe Erlinger, McDonald's does not endorse candidates for elected office, and that remains true in this race for the next president. We are not red or blue, we are golden, they say. Rather than joking about Donald Trump and saying, don't take him seriously, he's a joke, her message is, take him seriously, Sarah Elliott.
Yes. I mean, he's already been president. We know what one term under Donald Trump is like, and we didn't have no new wars. We didn't have any more wars. We had a really thriving, booming economy. People had more money in their pocket, and their wages exceeded inflation. And we had the largest wage growth for African Americans when Donald Trump was president. There was a lot of good policies there, and we had the Abraham Accords, of course, in the Middle East. And so, she talks about that he'll be the subject of skits and humor and jokes. Well, so will she. She already is. Saturday Night Live is doing wonderful parodies of her. Is she competent enough? Are all of her, policies, what are her policies? She cannot articulate an economic message. She was also in charge of the border as vice president, and we've had the largest increase of illegal immigration in American history. The population of London has crossed that southern border, and these are impacting minority communities, and this is why she's not doing so well with, let's say, Hispanics and Black men right now.
All right, well, look, a poll by the Associated Press, NORC Centre for Public Affairs Research, released this morning, was quite positive for Kamala Harris. It found that she's viewed more favourably than Donald Trump, including among independent voters that could decide the 7 swing states. It also shows that Trump no longer appears to have the advantage he once had on the handling of economic issues. He's still ahead, but she's eating into some of that lead.
General Ben Hodges, as always, thank you for joining us on the programme. Can I just ask you this to begin with? As we can all see, the American election is getting more and more raw, as if that were possible. And now some of America's top military figures are speaking out in really quite startling terms. We have General John Kelly, who served as Donald Trump's chief of staff. He is saying that Donald Trump, and I'm quoting now, falls into the general definition of fascist. And we have heard that General Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he told the celebrated journalist Bob Woodward that Trump is fascist to the core. Can that sort of comment, General, can that be justified for top-level military figures like General Kelly and General Milley to speak out in that way?
Well, keep in mind, of course, Mark Milley and John Kelly are retired general officers, and so there is a different sort of tradition about retired flag officers, generals and admirals speaking out versus obviously where it's inappropriate and incorrect for them to say something like this while they are still in uniform. But I think it is important that people like them with their experience and credibility and the proximity to the former president, that they do speak out.
These were very strong words, fascist to the core, meeting the definition of a fascist. Does that seem over the top to you, or do you agree with what your former colleagues are saying?
It only seems late, not over the top. Look, I live in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm there most of the time, and my German neighbors and family members, they are steeped in education about what happened in Germany in the 1930s. And so they see what's happening with Trump and his enablers. And for them, it is chilling to see that this could possibly be happening again 90 years after it happened in Germany. So, no, it's not over the top. Unfortunately, there are millions of people that somehow seem okay with it.
Okay, so that again is a very strong expression of opinion. To draw a parallel with Germany in the 1930s, the rise of the National Socialist Party under Adolf Hitler, the Nazis. That's about as strong as you can get. And you say what you said with no hesitation. So how do you justify that in America, which has checks and balances, which support democracy, we're told?
Yeah, well, you're right, John, and I think probably until about 2 years ago, I would have never thought it was possible, because I always had so much confidence in the Supreme Court that while I didn't agree with every court ruling over the past decades, I never questioned for a second that they would come down on the side of somebody like Trump, where immunity for a president. I mean, that hit me like a ton of bricks, that somehow a president could be literally above the law. And that's only because the Supreme Court made that decision when they didn't even have to. And then there have been other examples where some of our part of our judiciary has done things that seem to be enabling Trump. So that is part of what has given, I think, so many of us great concern. The other thing, of course, just use Mr. Trump's words himself. I mean, when you read the quote that General Kelly used, where Trump says, "Why I want my generals to be like Hitler's generals." Holy hell! How could anybody in any context think that that would be okay, or why would you want a general of the United States Army to be like somebody for the German Wehrmacht? That's why people are concerned.
Well, this is a, as it were, a powerful statement, and you are clearly right when you say a serving senior officer, a serving officer of any kind, could scarcely speak in anything like these terms. You are very familiar with the higher ranks of the American military today, not just in past years. I'm not going to ask you to name any names. It wouldn't be possible. It would, if it were the case, it would breach all sorts of confidences. Can you say to me that in the Pentagon now, in the higher ranks of the military, these kinds of fears are shared privately?
First of all, I would say that you can be confident that all of us take our oath to the Constitution very seriously. It's part of the culture that we reinforce it every time a soldier is promoted or re-enlists for another term, or throughout the course of the year. We will administer the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we do that so that it permeates everything that we do, and that our actions are based on the rule of law and on our Constitution. And so I think people are shocked to discover that the former president assumes or prefers that officers that their loyalty would be to him personally versus our tradition of specifically to the Constitution. Now, you're right. If I knew, I would never say if there were general officers or admirals that had different views, but I do know that there is some concern that if there is a return of Trump to the White House, that many of the senior generals and admirals that are in office now would be immediately removed, sacked, and replaced. Now, when I heard this from a person whose judgment I trust, of course, the president always has the prerogative to nominate who he or she wants as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, for example, or chief of the Army or chief of the Navy. That's always their prerogative. But to remove everybody because they would have been nominated during the Biden administration, the first thing I thought about is not only is that disruptive, but it also then puts it to mind, well, that must mean they have a litmus test in mind that whoever would be nominated by the Trump administration, that there would be some sort of litmus test to make sure that this officer would have some sort of personal loyalty. And I don't know what that litmus test would be,
Mm.
but I mean that would be implied. And never again, never in my life. I was in the Army for 38 years. Never in my life did I imagine that there would be anything like that. Now it seems entirely plausible.
So entirely plausible. There should be some sort of loyalty test for the most senior generals, admirals, flag officers in the American military. You believe? Were that to be the case, I suppose, General, the officers we're talking about would have no choice but to accede to it. I mean, they would be getting orders from the commander-in-chief, and he is, after all, their boss. It's their job to obey.
Well, first of all, they would have a choice. I mean, if I was in a situation where they said, "Ben, we really want you to be chief of the army or the vice chairman or something like that, but you're going to have to, we need to make sure that you agree that the last election was stolen, or that we can count on you that if the president says this, you are always going to do it." I absolutely would refuse to agree to something like that. It is our duty. It is our duty to not obey any illegal order.
Yeah.
And just because the president might have immunity doesn't mean that people who carry out his orders would have immunity. So everybody should be clear-eyed about this. Number two, I wouldn't want to belong to an institution where officers were willing to place their loyalty in the president versus to the Constitution. And in our Constitution, John, as I'm sure you and most of your listeners are familiar, Article 1 of the Constitution lays out the duties and responsibilities of the Congress. Article 2 lays out the duties and responsibilities and powers of the president. That's where in Article 2 it says the president shall be commander in chief of the Army and the Navy. Article 1 lays out specific responsibilities that the Congress has, responsibilities and authorities for regulation of the military, to provide for an army, to provide for a navy. So, yes, the president's commander in chief, but we also have, we are under congressional oversight as well. It's not just a unitary, the president's the boss.
Right, so you, General, would resign your commission rather than submit to a loyalty test or a demand of some sort of statement or oath of loyalty. Do you believe that many generals in the Pentagon, in the U.S. Armed Services now, do you think they would feel the same way? They would resign rather than accept that kind of demand for a statement of loyalty?
I would say the ones that I know, yes. They would not accept this. I think all of us were sickened when we first started hearing President Trump talking about, these are my generals, as if we were some third world country, that we're not his generals. Or just like when he would say, those are Obama judges, these are my judges. I mean, what an abomination, and also a clear, I don't think he really actually understands or cares about what the Constitution really says.